How long
Okay,
have they
so,
been censoring this? These 4 months.
oh, at least. Uh, well, I guess that means that we're in, we're over the target, right? As they like to say.
I would agree with that. That's a good assessment, I would say, right?
All right. So for everybody, good evening. I'm Lara Logan. I'm a journalist, and I have been a journalist for all my life, and more than 35 years at this point. The attack on me is relentlessly the same. She once was a great reporter, and now she sucks, and now she's crazy, and now she's too crazy and too far right for right-wing media, and so on and so on. Just pick your narrative. I really don't care, because people who are wrong about everything or deliberately lie, they just don't get to pass judgment on me and have me give a shit. It's a great feeling not to be afraid of what they can do or say about you. You are at great risk. I mean, us having this conversation tonight is pretty much taking on some of the most powerful, well, the most powerful people in the world. People who own all of the physical infrastructure, own or control all of the physical infrastructure that moves our data, stores our data, controls our data. And by data, I mean everything from phone calls to emails to texts to photographs to business records to fundraising campaigns to 911 calls to the national missing database of missing children. I mean, pretty much you name it, they control it. A lot of us, most people out there, have this illusion that their secrets, when they hit the button, they just go off into the ether, into this imaginary cloud. And, none of us can reach the clouds, right? So it must be out of reach, except it's not out of reach. It's very much in reach. It's owned and controlled by people who making a lot of money out of exploiting all of us. And I believe that that's the real divide in our society. Some of you will know Michael Curry. Some of you will be familiar with the Ericsson report. Some of you won't have any idea about it. He is, he becomes the central figure in exposing really the most powerful people and the corruption and the dishonesty behind what they own and control in our society, the political figures in the establishment that support them, and what all of this means for us. What I didn't understand that was critical to understanding Michael Curry and the Ericsson report is very simply this: they know everything about you. Is that right?
100%, yeah. And it was just wild when I saw just how unregulated the industry was, and just how I could literally pull up anybody's tax returns. Literally, you name it, I could just pull their tax returns up, from getting given a token, a security token that was supposed to be vice president of the bank, and they accidentally gave me vice president of the entire company.
Okay, wait. So take us back a few steps. Where were you working and what was your job?
Ooh. I was working at Quicken Loans, and I was a director of mortgage banking, also working specifically within the technology number porting aspects. So I'd caught on to something that was happening within the company, where they were wasting about, I'd say, $25 to $30 million year over year. And it was just because they would port these leads that were very expensive, industry only leads, meaning they're like $1,500 a pop. And they were all filled out. All the data is ready to go. Basically, everything is automatically filled up, automatically connected to a banker that is basically the power of attorney for a bunch of wealthy elites. So usually, I started noticing patterns. I started noticing specific bankers were, running the profiles, and these profiles are massive, billions and trillions of dollars, for specific subsets of different elites. And then I learned, once I fell down the rabbit hole of the Federal Reserve, kind of realized that the whole entire industry is fraudulent.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is they utilize escrows and taxes to basically never make a mortgage payment. They use that to basically take the highest interest rate on a refinance or a mortgage or purchase. They cycle those refinances basically over 3 to 5 times a year. And what that does is, if let's say your property is like $400,000 for the mortgage, but the property itself is like $7 million. Well, taxes in like California are extremely expensive. So you still have to fill up that escrow account. Now that escrow account is your loophole. So when you go to refinance, that loophole gets shut, and then you get everything that's in that escrow account, and it moves it over to the next company you move over to. So then what ends up happening is basically the tax rate goes up in all those cities, all those counties for the poor, and then the elites basically pretend like they're not doing this. But it's a legal loophole. I wouldn't shut up for quite a bit of time. I kept on saying, I'm not going to stop talking about this. This is wrong. Basically told me, shut up, like look the other way. Just, you got an opportunity to basically make billions of dollars utilizing this. It takes us usually till you get to like your mid, 30s and 40s before you find out about this loophole. But yeah, I wouldn't shut up. And then I got fired 3 years later when I started noticing that those old softwares were still drawing interest, compound interest. They basically just duplicate all the bonds and all the mortgages on the back end and funnel it all over to, different corporations. Those corporations will move their funds over to like the Cayman Islands, and then that corporation will bankrupt itself after all the board members get off of the board. It's patent fraud, but...
Okay, so here's the interesting part, people, and I know it can be a little complicated, so we're going to do our best to break down the Ericsson report in simple terms, because once you understand it, and once you realize exactly how many people in public office are involved in this, in covering up for Ericsson, and the kind of power that these private companies like this have, it's pretty shocking and obviously a little bit scary. Noticing corrupt practices in the mortgage industry that favored, basically the wealthiest elites, and that hurt the average person out there, and especially the poorer people. How did you go from that to how did you get to the Ericsson report?
I was while I was in the hospital, I was watching General Flynn and Donald Trump basically fight back against the FBI and against the deep state, and just I was an anonymous message board sleuth, posting on this anonymous message board while also on my Twitter account. So really, from its most basic, right? You think of like how a signal travels through a line, and so it's energy, frequency, vibration. Those are the most basic aspects.
Energy, frequency, and vibration.
Yeah, that's how you get noise or signal or energy through a wire line, right? Through fiber cables or through internet cables. So when you go to dial out to 911, you have to have your cell phone, which is separate from internet. But obviously now it's not. But you have that phone connection has to be ported over. And so that's ported over when you go to dial out to 911, emergency services, your fire, your police, your EMS. So the number portability center is your basically your iConnective, ports over from that company. So that company strictly deals with porting of the phone numbers for 6.5, I think it's like 6.5 billion cell phones around the world, 230 top level domains, 230 different countries plus. So this all, conveniently, right? Like these people the elites who run the world, they're going to want everything to go and basically be commingled back to one place. And that's your iConnective Ericsson, which was formerly Newstar.
I think everybody can understand anytime you consolidate and bring like every device in your home onto one system, all people have to do is have control of that one system, and they control every device in your house.
Except for the only caveat is that they went from domestic, right, a domestic non-agency outside of government contract to a foreign corporation in Ericsson.
Who are the portability companies? You're saying if I've got AT&T, Verizon, Cricket, it doesn't matter what it is. When I'm on my cell service, I dial a number. It goes to a portability center. Is that where it goes?
Exactly. To your Newstar, which it was Newstar for the first 17 years. And then in 2012, 2013, they awarded the contract over to Ericsson.
Who awarded that contract?
So the FCC awards it under Obama. And end of 2012, beginning of 2013.
So, and Ericsson has that contract for, how many countries in the world?
Well, Newstar has it. It's Newstar who owned it, and Newstar controlled it. You think of the capital N and the capital S in Newstar, and you realize like that's actually the front company for the NSA. Oh. Yeah. So everybody hears NSA, and they just automatically assume, oh, the NSA. It's like, well, how does the NSA get their data? That's Newstar.
How do you know that New Star is a front company for this NSA? What's that based
Because
on?
a British military intelligence operative in like 2005 or six wrote about it on a public forum where he published an article about it.
Michael provides all of these documents.
For this report, I had to do everything open source. So everything is open source intelligence. Everything is you can go back and check it again, prove it. It's documented.
And people can find this information on your website,
Yeah,
right?
that's pvintel.pro.
Let's go back to explaining what it is. You have your cell phone, you make a call, and it goes to one of these portability companies, such as what? What are their names?
So they all subcontract. It all subcontracts for basically your AT&T or Verizon, your T-Mobile, all of those companies. They subcontract through a company called iConnective, is what it became when they transferred the contract over, which was a brand new subsidiary of Ericsson.
And what was it before it went to Ericsson?
It was AT&T's data center in New Jersey. So then a foreign corporation comes in and buys our critical infrastructure, basically everything AT&T had owned and controlled before, regarding John Durham's CIA torture tape investigation, which the other company, Telcordia Technologies, which becomes Ericsson iConnective, they were the ones who controlled the CIA torture tapes in Abbottabad, where basically Osama bin Laden was hiding out.
Okay, you threw a lot of things in there, Michael. I mean, really what you're saying is in 2013, the contract for all of this is given by the Obama administration to Ericsson, and you think that they were covering for the CIA and MI6, which is the British intelligence service. So I'm glad that you just put an international target on our backs in addition to the in addition to the one here. By the end of this call, I think there'll barely be an intelligence service that doesn't have us in their sights, but that's okay. In 2002, Loretta Lynch is the person who signs off on the sale of that from AT&T's data centers over to
transfers it from Telcordia to New Star, and that's and she signs off on it on 22 days before September the 11th.
And what's the significance of that?
The significance of that is that you have basically the most important aspects of number porting being transferred over to, really it's not the craziest thing that happened on September the 11th, but it happened via emergency contract, so it required the buildings to go down.
Wait, no, before you go to 9/11, you can't go there yet. I don't get the significance of transferring it to New Star. You said from Telcordia to New Star in 2002, correct?
22 days before September 11th, 2001.
Why does that matter?
Ericsson ends up taking control via free hands on September the 11th, but it's again, it's through this emergency contract that any of that even takes place.
And is this an issue because New Star is a front company for the NSA?
Yeah, but realistically, both companies were owned by Warburg Pincus at the time. So
Warburg Pincus, you have to explain that. You can't just throw that in there.
On January 12th of 2012, one point in 2011, you have Warburg Pincus owning CrowdStrike, Telcordia, and New Star.
So interesting, because for those people who know the inside baseball on this, CrowdStrike, of course, is the technology company that Hillary Clinton would ultimately use to troll through her, home server to, of course, determine that she didn't have any she shouldn't have there, and then, of course, they were the people that suggested initially that there had been a hack, and eventually, under oath, the head of CrowdStrike admitted that nothing was ever hacked from the DNC servers, and that basically proved that the former NSA cryptologist Bill Binney was correct when he said that this information that came from the DNC had been downloaded onto a hard drive. And he knew that from the digital signatures. And Binney proved that. They tried to discredit him. He was and remains a legendary figure for anyone who knows and understands the cyber world, cybersecurity, and so on. So, but that's just interesting that CrowdStrike and New Star and Ericsson would all be owned by Warburg Pincus, which is a law firm, and we don't expect law firms to be in. If you said to me BlackRock or something like that, that would make more sense. But now you've got a law firm that owns all these technology companies. Bill Binney created a program called ThinThread, which had the ability to sift through data, intelligence gathered by the NSA globally, mountains and mountains and mountains of data, without violating the privacy of American citizens. And it was essentially rooted in metadata and patterns of analysis and patterns that linked people together. So what it did was that it sifted through the data to basically find a needle in a haystack, but it did so in a way that did not violate the Fourth Amendment. And Bill Binney put that forward at the NSA, but actually General Michael Hayden, when he was in charge, he was the one who said, no, 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 we don't want that. Instead, we want to pay, instead of having the free solution that you can have in-house from one of our own trusted people who is widely respected, right, across the world. No, we're going to go with the private company solution that absolutely violates the privacy rights of every single American.
Exactly. Yeah, and it was the one that was like billions of dollars.
Yeah, and was going to cost the taxpayer billions of dollars. Yeah.
Yeah, so pretty crazy. But then you leapfrog, fast forward past it. The tech transfer actually occurs on September the 11th. September 11th, 2001. The patent for local number portability put in place by Ericsson was put in place on September the 11th, 1998. So that's, I guess, a coincidence.
Yeah, I guess, if you believe in coincidences. So let's go back when Loretta Lynch, who at the time is an official in New York, when she approves the sale of AT&T Telcordia's number portability centers to Newstar, which is a front company for the NSA.
Exactly.
Okay, and why does she do that?
I would assume probably corruption, because how did they know that an emergency contract would be put in place? Because you can't just like flip the switch on technology like that. But that's precisely what they did. On September the 11th, 2001, they were awarded a emergency contract. They said that nobody else could, handle it.
I see. So 2 weeks before 9/11, Newstar basically takes over of pretty much the entire mobile information system
not all of
in
it,
the United
but
States.
the addresses they need, basically Chicago, New York, and I think California. Those are the three that they really needed, because that's where all the data gets pinged over to Verizon, became the backup like 4 or 5 hours before the towers went down.
Goodness, you got to wonder what on earth is going on here. 2 weeks before 9/11, Newstar takes over the contract. And hours before, Verizon establishes backup centers.
The day of.
So then what happens on September 11th? As a result of the attacks, an emergency contract is approved by the Bush administration, right? And what does it say?
It basically provides Newstar executive office privileges, plus. Basically, on that day, you had Cheney. He went down into the emergency, basement. Everybody went down there. So they changed out all of the equipment, changed out all the records, changed out all the data. And so the same company that ends up spying on Donald Trump is the same company that's been spying on the executive office of the president since 2001, September 11th. That's Newstar.
Okay, but I don't understand the significance of that emergency contract. Why did they need to give those portability centers special access?
For porting, right? You're talking about all of the trades that are happening at the World Trade Center.
What do you mean?
What do you mean? What I mean, when you make trades, you have all those things happen through a signal. Those signals go through a wire. That wire goes through cables. The cables are owned by Ericsson and Telcordia.
In the beginning, you started out by talking about cell phones, but actually, it's more than cell phone calls that go through the portability centers. It's all the data.
Internet,
including financial transactions.
Correct. So through DNS, domain name server, you have Newstar controlling all the top level domains in 230 plus countries, plus the cell phone access in 230 plus countries. And then all of that gets transferred over to Ericsson in 2012.
I mean, how is it that they have the contracts for so many countries all over the world? I mean, how does Newstar make that happen?
That's a good question. You look at it from 2001 to 2004. Yeah, and how they accumulated all those contracts in that little time. Because by 2002, 2003, they had already had all of those top-level domains in all of those 230 plus countries.
And Newstar is not that big a company, is it?
Well, for what they did and what they've been doing for CIA and MI6, pretty big deal. But when it's a front organization, right, you're not going to think much of it. You're just going to think, oh, they just provide DNS. That's all that they do.
Yeah, you look it up online and anybody can do that. It's pretty innocuous. But I was curious to see that there's a South African there in a fairly prominent position.
Rodney Jaffe.
Yeah, top cyber expert under the Obama administration. And then what?
He was told, right, hey, you'll be the VIP if Hillary wins. He ends up being a part of the Durham indictment against Michael Sussman. So Michael Sussman's representing him, representing Twitter, representing Newstar, and partner at Perkins Coie, all at the same time. But this system, right, is how you process all of your FISA warrants. It's how you pull them all. It's how you, if you need to order the warrant, right, it goes through your portability system.
Why does a FISA warrant go through a portability?
Because they need a rubber stamp.
What does a FISA warrant have to do with a portability center?
Well, so that's where they would need to go to request to get to pull the data.
When you get a FISA warrant, basically you're going to the intelligence, the highest intelligence court in the land that was set up specifically to approve warrantless surveillance.
Yep.
Right? And that surveillance isn't just on one person. What you're saying is for each line of surveillance can cover thousands, hundreds of thousands of people?
Incidental surveillance is what it's called.
What is it called?
Incidental surveillance?
Because as you're collecting from your target, you're incidentally collecting
From everybody.
information and data from everybody around them, and that can number in the hundreds of thousands.
Easily,
right?
Very easily, yep.
So basically what you have is AT&T's systems go down on 9/11. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, they had a switch that got knocked out, and that's in the report. You can read it. It's from.
And the switch got knocked out where? In New York.
So that's from an article that is called "The Ultimate Little Black Book." Conveniently, so when you read that article from the Washington Post, and we all know what the Little Black Book is for Jeffrey Epstein, Newstar also helps optimize web traffic for clients such as Amazon, so that when a customer types in Amazon.com, Newstar directs the request to one of Amazon's thousands of servers around the world. It provides the same kind of service for Oracle, Emirates Airlines, and Forbes. So that Jeffrey Gennick says, we're at all the key internet nodes in the world. Depending on the time of day and the point of origination, we send the traffic to Seattle, for instance, or to a data center in Miami, or another data center in Singapore. If there's a fiber cable cut in the Pacific, we see it before the carriers do and turn the traffic in the other direction so it goes counterclockwise around the globe. And so it says, Newstar helps maintain communication during crisis. The September 11, 2001 attack on the World Trade Center took out a large AT&T switch that served 50,000 telephones for the Wall Street area. Gannick said within a week, AT&T found another switching device, or trucked it into Lower Manhattan, and installed it at a telecommunications facility at 60 Hudson Street. As soon as the switch was plugged in and the green lights on the control panel were blinking, Newstar instructed AT&T, that's a lie, went into its database and deleted the World Trade Center address for each of the 50,000 numbers and replaced it with 60 Hudson Street. So really what they did was they gave Ericsson control, and Ericsson with free hands did exactly what they said AT&T did.
What I understand is that portability centers are really they're in a sense like switching centers, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so you make a contract with whoever it is, Amazon, Target, whoever, that when anybody types in that name on their computer, they're the ones that direct that traffic to one of your servers.
Correct.
So they really control the flow of information.
All information, yeah.
And that includes financial information, financial transactions, Bitcoin transactions, emails, photographs, contracts, you name it.
Yep.
Now you have Ericsson entering the picture after 9/11 as a black contractor, right? That means a contractor for DoD, black operations, where they're outside of the accountability of Congress. Correct. And hidden behind walls of classification.
Yeah. So meanwhile, while you think it's all going to the NSA, it actually is not. It goes first to the ISPs and first to Newstar, which is on the outside. So that before the data can even get to the NSA, it has to funnel through Newstar. So Newstar is your CIA front.
This also applies to classified information.
Everything.
Correct? I mean, every single level, from secret all the way up through top secret to top secret secure compartmentalized information, to your special access programs. I mean, everything basically goes through a private company, Newstar, before it even gets to our own intelligence agencies.
Exactly, yeah.
And before it reaches the president of the United States. Okay, and so who owns Newstar?
Warburg Pincus.
And who owns Warburg Pincus? Who are the people who control that?
Well, it goes back to the Eric Warburg and Max Warburg and Paul Warburg of the Federal Reserve Act, the chief architects. You have that company, right, that trails all the way back to 1913, Treaty of Versailles. You had Paul Warburg, this is his idea for the Federal Reserve System. And then, you have one of them representing Germany and the other brother representing America, yeah. So then you look at, so we jump a little bit forward, but you look at who is the president of the New York Fed at the time. That's Timothy Geithner. Under Hillary Clinton, right, and Obama's term, you had Hillary at the State Department and Geithner at the Treasury.
I don't know about anybody else, but as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about how long these people have been around and how long they have been abusing the system and lying to us and getting away with it. It's kind of hard not to be angry.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's the usual suspects over and over and over again. And everybody keeps waiting for some kind of smoking gun to reveal, these great unknown puppet masters. But in a sense, there's nothing great or unknown about them. They're hiding in plain sight right in front of us. They've been pretty much controlling the system since the Federal Reserve Act and probably before that, all the way back to 1913. I mean, it's a century, for goodness sake. And what was the point of transferring it to Ericsson? It's because it's a foreign company and you now take it outside of the jurisdiction of the United
Correct,
States.
yes.
What happens, from 9/11 up to 2013, as Ericsson is consolidating its hold over this infrastructure and New Star is operating it? What is significant there?
You just have a bunch of transfers, like technology companies and corporations are just creating different technologies and basically handing it over back and forth, going from one company to another. Once you get to Obama's administration, that's when banking really takes off. It's interesting, right? Interesting to note, 2008 real estate crash all seems to coincide with them, almost like they were taking those cables and actually putting them there to control all the data. So you're moving that over from a domestic company to a foreign company. So now there's no oversight. So warrants for anything and anything under the sun, the back door to the sheriff's office, voting, all of this, all these tabulation centers, all these data centers, all of that is going now through a foreign Swedish telecommunications company that has no allegiance to the country.
What else is happening with Ericsson?
Well, now after the report came out, I found out that there was a civil case filed where 862 Americans, of them included James Foley, Kayla Muller. So their families of 286 Gold Star veterans, plus those two reporters, were killed by Ericsson because Ericsson gave their data over to ISIS. It was revealed in February 2022 that Ericsson was sponsoring, funding, and bribing ISIS for 2000 to about 2021. It's through like SAIC and different subcontractors, right? Because it's not going to go directly through the main corporation. But Ericsson controls the data at the end of the day. All data flows back to them. They gave away American soldiers' geolocations to the terrorists with the technology that was paid for by United States taxpayer dollars so that the terrorists, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, insurgents, whatever, could take that data, take the geolocation of the American soldiers, and use that data to kill them knowingly. So that's what they're being sued for right now in civil court.
That is so outrageous. The first thing a lot of people are going to ask about is they're going to say that can't be true because if it was, I would be hearing about it. I would know about this. This would be reported.
Yeah, well, who owns the cables?
Ericsson.
Yeah.
And so
You're not going to get anything out there because everything since 2013 has been flipped to a foreign Swedish telecommunications company. So that is why a lot of the laws from 2013 on, anything in the House, anything within the Senate, any of that could just been illegally done because Constitution goes out the window because now you're operating on cables that are owned and operated by the Swedish crown.
And they can provide lines of communication that are outside, for example, FOIA requests, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, just as soon as Ericsson takes over, they're outside of FOIA requests. As soon as you switch over from domestic New Star to foreign Ericsson, who is oversight on that? It's a non-agency, non-government contract, so there's no oversight. And then there are foreign Swedish telecommunications companies, so they don't owe their allegiance to anyone.
Like, how long does Ericsson have this contract for?
Now they have it for the next, I think, 4 years.
Okay, but so why during the Trump administration they could have shut it down?
Well, the Mueller probe was a cover-up. So this is the treason part. This is where treason is committed. In 2008, if you look into the Ericsson report, what you'll see is on page 3, SEC filing response to Ericsson on September 29, 2010, the SEC notes, you're doing business with terrorists, right? And you need to report that information because you're not reporting it right now.
That's 2010. Yep.
And so now, you fast forward, Hillary Clinton gets $750,000 from Ericsson in 2011.
Through the Clinton Foundation.
Yeah, for a speech by Bill Clinton in Hong Kong, China. And then you have fast forward to now. That shows you that knowingly, the Biden and the Biden administration, while he was vice president, knew that Ericsson was doing business with terrorists, state sponsors of terrorism. Irregardless of that, he still went forward and they partnered with Ericsson while the Southern District of New York is charging Ericsson with funding, bribing, and sponsoring ISIS, hitting them for $1 billion fine. You basically have our government covering up for this critical infrastructure swap because they never imagined that Hillary Clinton would lose. And when that happened, it threw all their plans up into a muck.
But then Trump comes in. He can end it all. Why doesn't he?
Because they investigate him for Russiagate. Bob Mueller creates this investigation, which is really just a blocking and tackling operation to finish the installing of the critical infrastructure into the systems. From my research, very thorough research, this was all planned. That's what I feel. That's what I think. That's what the data shows.
And military communications, sensitive data, everything is flowing through this non-regulated organization, and you can't even FOIA request. You can't do anything,
Nothing.
right?
Yep,
That's crazy.
100%. And so they run our 911, they run our Amber Alerts, they run our National Child Exploitation Center in 150 countries. If you're wondering, like, how does Jeffrey Epstein, operate with a black book? This is how he does it. Neustar and Ericsson. Because these two companies, between the two of them, control the phone porting and numbering for 6.5 billion phones worldwide. 2 billion here in the United States.
My final question to you, Michael, is if you're mapping a network of people who are undermining your country and you have visibility on those systems, what immediately starts happening the moment Trump gets into office is all these leaks from the Oval Office, which is a SCIF, secure compartmentalized information facility. And so you can't overhear a conversation that happens inside a SCIF because it's built so that you can't overhear it. So in order for people to know what Trump was saying and doing in the Oval Office, you had to be spying.
Yep, absolutely. Through embassies and through, really, I mean, again, through Neustar, like you've got front-loaded access for all of this, and that's why this report also declassifies publicly Five Eyes, because it provides you the specific corporations and how they're involved, the contracts. So yeah, it's a public declassification of Five Eyes. Then you start to think about COVID. Well, how could they do all this illegal stuff? Well, because all our critical infrastructure was handed over. So every mainstream media company since 2013 is using and operating on Ericsson's cables. So you wonder why the mainstream media is literally against the people in this country. Well, it's because they're operating on foreign cables run and owned by Ericsson, which.
But the journalists don't know that. Since you published the Ericsson report, have you had to correct anything? Did you get anything wrong?
No.
Has anybody discredited anything that you put in it?
Nope.
And so when you're attacked, are the attacks always just personal? There's nothing on the substance?
Yeah, no, never any substance behind anything.
And what's the weakness in your reporting, if there is one?
The inability to get the information out, I'd say, to all 3,300 counties.
So what would help?
I would assume, right, creating a grassroots movement of people that go and hand the report over. Like, the only way that they start to take that seriously is if enough people are upset. Taking the report to them and saying, like, hey, this is how child trafficking happens. This is the same cables that they use for this numbers portability system connects to the National Child Exploitation Center and the International Child Exploitation Center. That's the oversight for that. Now, that oversight goes to a foreign Swedish telecommunications company that has no allegiance to this country. So that would be your key to controlling people, blackmail.
How do you make the leap from people reporting a child missing to people being trafficked and pornography? What do you mean by that?
So when you go to the cyber tip clearinghouse, when anyone reports child pornography, this cyber tip line is what comes in and takes that data. So who stores the data? Who holds it? Ericsson, iConnective. They got both companies for upstream and downstream got in trouble. Telia AB and Ericsson both got charged by the federal government. Again, until you get enough people angry enough, which I think will happen or could happen through the Sound of Freedom movie. See the movie, well, what's the solution to the problem? Well, if you don't get rid of Ericsson, there is no solution.
But if you get rid of Ericsson, aren't you just going to get another Ericsson, a different company?
I would assume you probably swap up to Starlink.
Oh, that's what Elon Musk wants. You're moving your systems from the earth to the skies, but it's still owned by a private company.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not saying this is going to be easy, right? But it's probably better than a company that kills American soldiers and then come out and admit that we killed them. This has to do with on this 2020 election, you have Neustar and Ericsson both purchased Cradlepoint. Ericsson purchased Cradlepoint, which is your routing. So when you go to hit the speaker to go for firefighters, police, EMS, all of that, they use a system called Cradlepoint for servers and for their radio. So that was purchased on the day before the 2020 election, and then Neustar purchases VeriSign's security services, which is the back-end signatures for the DNS, and they purchased that on the same day before the 2020 election. So both fraudulent purchases.
Between Neustar and Ericsson, do they control all the data globally?
Everything, yeah. Yeah, BlackRock, PwC, PricewaterhouseCooper. You have Newstar, NASDAQ. Like all of that's controlled by Ericsson Technology and actually
Okay.
owned by investor AB, Ericsson's owner.
You said that Ericsson admits to funding terrorism
Oh
and it
yeah, so
pays the fine.
they admit it in February, but they've been under criminal investigation since 2013 through a deferred prosecution agreement. They don't actually get any sort of charge or have any sort of case play out until 2019, where they're hit with the highest federal charge, $1 billion levied fine against Ericsson, basically covering up all of their dealings in China. That's the thing that I found the most confusing is they don't ever go into the China part. They just completely ignore China, and instead they go into like Libya, business dealings in Iran, Egypt, and I think Tunisia. It's basically 4 countries that are not China.
That's where Ericsson admits to doing what?
They admitted to Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Then in February 2022, just 2 days before the Ukraine war breaks out, you have an internal leak within Ericsson. And that internal leak reveals they lied when they were on probation. And when they were on probation, they had already broke their probation once. Then they were charged $1 billion for breaking their probation. After that $1 billion fine is paid, then they have the leak happen. The leak reveals that they've been sponsoring, bribing, and funding ISIS. But this one's criminal. So they admit and accept that criminal penalty. Now they've admitted guilt in the federal circuit and admitted guilt in the criminal circuit. And our country seems to be so corrupt. I would assume it's because it's owned and operated by the Swedish crown, so you really can't do anything to them.
The United States government has government contracts with Ericsson that while they're prosecuting them in criminal court for violations of for working with the enemies of the United States to kill American citizens. And then that doesn't result in them canceling any contract.
Nope.
It doesn't result in them severing ties with Ericsson. They get basically a slap on the wrist because, $300-400 million is nothing to this company, which is worth what? How much is Ericsson worth, Michael?
They don't front load too much, but they own AstraZeneca, they own the NASDAQ, they own tons of companies. 2.5 billion.
So one of the obvious things here is that if Ericsson owns all the data, including classified information and also systems of communication that are outside the Federal Records Act, they're outside the FOIA process, they bypass Congress basically in the United States, and they bypass U.S. legislation. You can only imagine what they have on every elected official.
Everything, all the dirt, and then not just that, they could go after Trump. So you have an avenue to go after him, right? So they go after him. Now this is this is conjecture. I'm not saying it's fact, but the same day that Bruce Reinhart orders the warrant on Mar-a-Lago is the same day that the civil case is filed, August 5th.
Because you actually have no idea what those documents are.
I can't say anything.
Oh, you do know what those documents are, possibly.
I met with a couple. Anyways, I'm gonna shut up.
So that's not just something that you're pulling out of the sky. You've done some work and some research. But why would Trump be turning that over to Ericsson?
No, he would be turning it over to the deceased, the
families.
Yeah, the families.
One of the most important things for people to understand is that there are private companies, both one American and one foreign, that have an unbelievable amount of power. Of course, they have extraordinary wealth, but more importantly, they have an extraordinary amount of power. And they so much power that they can admit helping to kill American soldiers and get away with it.
Yeah, and because they own all the lines and they own all the media.
Including this one that we're speaking on tonight.
And it's like, man, the media, the broadcasting, the Pfizer and taking those vaccines. And think about all of the, digital during COVID, right? All of that is happening over the internet where there's no jurisdiction. It's corporate jurisdiction. All happens through terms of service.
And think about COVID pushing us really accelerating the push into the digital world, which only makes these companies much more powerful, unimaginable power.
Yeah, and then when you consider the PSYOPs aspect of it, you could literally run PSYOPs on the people.
And of course, Don't forget that when Obama left office, one of his last acts as president was to hand over ownership of the internet to the global community.
October 1st, 2016, he gives over the NTIA-IANA protocols. That's why none of our national security, cybersecurity, critical infrastructure can be checked, because none of that information can be entered into a court of record, because the courts are operating on a foreign Swedish telecoms infrastructure. So you go to try to enter any evidence of fraud, and guess what happens? Denied. When you add the Ericsson piece, it's like, oh, wow. We are literally living we might as well be living in China. Yeah, and then I'll add this too, Laura. Since 2002, Huawei and Ericsson have been sharing global patents. Anyone that wants to sit there and tell you that restrict act this act that, at its most basic core, when I called CISA and when I called FBI to open up investigations and the Senate House Committee to open an investigation, I explained it to them, and none of them could tell me that I was wrong. So what that states and means is Huawei and Ericsson both have carte blanche access to all of our data and critical infrastructure.
Which means that China has access to everything.
Every last thing. Yep.
Does that also apply to, control of your home?
When I called CISA, if you listen to that call, he literally is like, yeah, that's how it is. I'm like, what? What do you mean that's how it is? It's like, yeah, that's just how it is. That's how we do it. That's how we do business. We have the taxpayers pay a bunch of taxes, and then if the taxpayer has something happen within their own home or within their own devices or their own companies, they have to pay for that on their own. So then who's being protected by CISA? Nobody, just the defense contractors and the federal government.
Really, you start to see how much the American taxpayer is being abused and how we're financing our own abuse.
100%. And then you consider all of those things being controlled and operated by a foreign corporation. They can run psyops on you. They can target you. I mean, they run the National Child Exploitation Center and the Amber Alert system.
One thing that this is so important, for people that need to understand on a more simple basis, is the Amber Alerts, because everyone's waiting for some special thing on their emergency broadcast on their phone to set off the chain reaction. But the reality is it's the children that are going to make everyone angry enough to finally do something. And it's the Amber Alerts being diverted from kidnapped children. So what I want Michael to explain further is they'll say, look there, not there. So the children are getting taken away and everyone is looking in the opposite direction. This is the anger that people need to realize. Your child goes missing and they're being sent on the wrong path. So this is something that everyone listening really needs to let that sink in.
They can literally disappear children running operations in child trafficking. And I mean, you saw with half the 911 calls, with a lot of these shootings, school shootings, it took 90 minutes. Well, who's saying it took 90 minutes? Ericsson. So what happens if you want to find out? You don't have a choice. Here's the data. Here's what they're saying the data shows.
And when you raise the 911 calls, I think of the Mandalay Bay massacre in Las Vegas. I think of January 6th. I think of 9/11. On all of those days, people assume because there's a lot of people around there that, the cell phone towers were just overwhelmed. But A, there's no ability to prove whether that was true or not. And B, it could just as easily be that the calls were being throttled or blocked.
100%, yeah, and that's the thing, right? So long as that's the case, how can we ever have another system where, you know what actually happened to a kid, what actually took place with a trafficking event? You don't, and that's the problem. I really think they need to know about this. I think everyone has to know about this.
Yes, who these companies are that control all financial transactions, flows of information, classified information, secret documents, your deepest, darkest secrets, to everything that's out there. And it's just staggering that the United States would hand over control of that to a foreign company, and it doesn't touch the company. They can still keep operating pretty much with near impunity.
100%.
I hope that this has been informative for people. There's a lot of detail to this and many aspects around it that we have not covered, but we will get to that. The important thing right now is helping people understand. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you for the work that you do. I guess you want people to read the report, download the report, share the report, proliferate the report any way that you can. and spend a little time trying to understand it. Take a close look, do your own homework. All the source documents are there, the contracts, the court case, the court records, and so on.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. God bless.